time we give back. Someone see and show someone where love's at. Even if you don't give a dime, give your heart and share your time. Help somebody else in life. Give back. Let's give back.
Welcome back to another episode of Ignite, Empower, Transform, where we sit and speak to what we call superheroes in our community. This episode, we have an opportunity to speak to a superhero in his own right, Don Rogers. Don, thanks for coming.
Larry, thank you for having me.
Don, we're going to get right into this. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Wow, superhero. I don't know if I would use that word to describe
We'll get
myself.
there, and I bet you will.
Well, let me give you some background. So I'm a kid from the Bronx. We were talking about it before we came on. Grew up in the South Bronx, over by Castle Hill and Soundview Projects.
Know it well?
Oh, absolutely, right in the neighborhood. As a matter of fact, the Producer Days program, I grew up probably 5 houses from her home, and I grew up with those folks. So to make a long story short, I'm actually a partner with Ernst Young within our financial services division. I'm a CPA in the state of New York.
Okay.
I've held licensure as a Series 7 registered representative and a Series 24 registered principal. A lot of titles. I felt they were important, and we were chatting earlier before the cameras came on. I was one of 8 kids in an Irish Catholic family in the middle of the South Bronx, and I see what's going on in the country today, and Jose asked me to come down and talk, and I really want to do that because I think that we've got to remember where we came from and what that kind of melting pot, that community meant to me and my success, and how we can drive that back through the kids that are still there today and help them succeed and kind of work their way through that system. So to make a long story short, when I graduated from high school, I didn't know anybody with a white-collar job.
Okay.
And within my family, we like to joke around and call it from the back streets to the boardroom.
Gotcha.
I laugh when CEOs and CFOs of major corporations in America ask for me for advice, and I kind of want to look over my shoulder and see if they're looking for my dad, but it's actually me that they want to talk to. So it's a lot of fun. To make a long story short, we were kidding around earlier, like how do you get into what it is you choose to do in your career. And for me, it was real simple. I had a choice of going into the unions or going to college. And when I went to college, I had to find a job that actually paid enough money to pay the bills, because if I didn't, my father was going to have a serious problem with me going to school and not going to work in the unions. So to make a long story short, as I look down the list of the highest paying careers coming out of school, when I was coming out of school, public accounting happened to be pretty high on the list. So I said, hey, you know what? I think that's something that I want to do, and that's something that I'm going to pursue. Within public accounting, I find to have a passion in terms of financial services, in terms of helping corporations develop their strategy, and that's what I actually do today. I work with CFOs and CEOs on tying their corporate strategy into the finance function, given my background in finance and in public accounting, and then helping them drive that through their target operating model, which is how do they actually run their business, and then ultimately into serving the business and providing insight and helping them drive ultimately the business model.
So let's touch on a few things. Let's take a few steps back. So growing up in the Bronx.
Sure.
You said you didn't know about these white collar workers.
Oh my God, no.
Right.
No.
So I'm sure in your travels you've met, like we happen to meet today, growing up in the same neighborhood. You meet children or young adults who are coming from these same areas or similar. How do you encourage them? How do you inspire them, ignite them to see the things that you saw and just carry it forward?
Well, in order to talk about that, I need to tell you a little story. So I had gotten involved with a program where we came into the inner city public schools, which I am a product of. And we were talking to the kids about macroeconomics and microeconomics and kind of telling them about how business works and how that affects the world. And what I realized was there was a lack of what I would call focus on opportunity. Where you go from here once you graduate from high school. And I realized, it's time to get involved. It's time to kind of share the message and help kids understand there is a path. There is just so much more out there. Today you look at me and I'm a 46-year-old business executive, partner with a major firm. I've got all the trappings of what you would call an affluent life. But I was an at-risk kid. I was absolutely running around the streets when I was a kid.
Right.
Got involved with the wrong things.
Right. Right.
And had good mentors, people who took me under their wing.
Right.
And I was very involved with the boys clubs in New York.
Right.
And I had that safe environment to help me focus and transition my life, and then get focused and propel. When I meet kids today, I try to relate to them. There's a couple of programs that I've gotten involved with, and I've had the real, pleasure to work with inner city youth. And, frankly, we grew up in a melting pot of a society. I was the Irish Catholic kid on the block. We had the black guy that lived up the block, the Puerto Rican guy that lived next to us.
Right.
We all got along.
Right.
We didn't know any
Absolutely.
better.
Absolutely.
We didn't know any better. And that's the beauty of growing up in that environment. In going back in that environment, wearing a suit and a tie, and not necessarily connecting with these kids, I had to find a way to figure out how can I get back into that environment and actually help them develop their messaging. So there's a couple of programs I got involved with over the years.
Let's hear about it.
Yeah, YouthInc was one of them. YouthInc was a number of investment bankers that got together, realizing that they can use their networks and their friends and their funds to go and paint the wall in the YMCA, or we could actually get together and help boards of organizations that help inner city youth. And that's what we did. So I was on the consulting advisory board. I went out and I met with different individuals who were actually on their board of directors, and I helped them bring in new board members and raise funds and kind of bring business concepts into the charitable world. Another program that I actually wound up on the board of directors of is Trailblazers. So it's a beautiful program. If you remember the Fresh Air Fund when we were kids.
Right. It sounds very familiar. Yeah.
Very similar concept where we would sponsor inner city kids to come up to a camp in northern New Jersey and to hike out, learn coping skills on the Appalachian Trail. So these kids go out, they live in in the woods with the bears and everything else, and they learn how to make fires, do what they got to do. We got kids that come in on kayaks, coming on bikes, and it's I know if you picked me up and put me in that environment, I wouldn't be able to survive. So it's coping skills in life. And then more importantly, like you said, in meeting these kids and realizing, or maybe remembering what it was like when I was a kid. I'm not sure if I mentioned it on the program yet, but we were talking about in the pre-programming, I didn't know anybody with a white-collar job when I graduated high school. So my dad literally sat me down and said, son, we have a problem here. You're going into a career that I can't help you with.
Gotcha.
He had 8 kids before me. So, I'm sorry, 7 kids. I was the 8th, and he was like, "I'm very worried about your choices here." Thankfully, Larry, it turned out okay. The old man's happy. But to be frank, it was a long road. So what I did when I started working with these kids in the inner city through these programs that I talked about was try and relate back to them the skill sets that they need in order to be successful in life. There's things that you can do that you don't need an education for.
Absolutely.
That you don't need special training for. Show up on time. Have the right attitude. Dress not for the job you have, but for the job you want to have. Be personable.
Let me stop you there. Because I know that this is it's gonna air to a lot of people, whether they're young or old. And I think those 3 points are important. On time doesn't necessarily mean if it's at 3 o'clock, you be there at 3 o'clock.
No,
means you might want to show up at 2:30.
Sure.
You want to get there. You want to give yourself time. You want to be ready for whatever's coming towards you.
Absolutely.
And I think that's an important point that we don't just skate over. We let people know it's real.
Yeah.
It's real. It's not just a saying. What are you doing now? What are you doing now that would compel some young person to say, you know what, this guy just told me he was from my neighborhood. He grew up the same way I did. And although he's doing this CPA thing, I might not want to do that. What's something else that you could say, let me show you a way?
I just dropped my son off at Bucknell University in July. And, kind of when he walked away with tears in my eyes, I gave him the things that we didn't have. One of the things that I mentioned earlier is I couldn't afford school. We didn't have that. And we really didn't know a lot about the loan programs and everything back then. So I put myself through school at night and on the weekends and through the summer and winter sessions. My son grew up in a very different environment. My daughter does as well. Your question was, I'm sorry, let's just come back to your question for a minute so I can answer it.
Sure. So I want to know what other, you know what? Let's go with this because I like where this is going. Let's stick with this.
Yeah, and when I look at these kids today, I realize that they've got something. We often take for granted what we have in life. So, what I've done is try and instill a work ethic in my children. You may have certain things that I didn't grow up with, but that doesn't mean, there's a certain toughness when you come from the streets.
Right.
When you don't have, you want to fight to get.
Right.
The kids, I think that was the question, how do I relate to them? Well, they don't initially relate to me. I don't look like them, I don't talk like them, I don't act like them.
Right.
Larry, this is so important because, as I sit in boardrooms, people don't realize where I'm from. When I graduated from high school, I had to learn how to speak. I had to change my accent. I'm a tough kid from the South Bronx.
Gotcha.
You know the neighborhood I came from. Well, I had to learn, and it was painful, right? I was watching a Joe Namath documentary the other day, and I think he said it best because we know Joe had many, many, many years of success, and then one bad interview that we, that unfortunately, yes. But he didn't let that define him.
Right.
And what he said was, it's not how you get knocked down, it's how you get back up. And I like that. It resonated with what I was thinking about at the time. If you're willing to fight, you're willing to change, you're willing to adopt, you're willing to evolve, you're going to be successful.
Right.
If you think you know it all, if you think you've got it figured out,
right.
you got a hard road ahead of you.
Yeah. So with that as well, I want to transition a little bit into the climate.
Sure.
Of our government and what it's doing to our communities.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if they're black, white, or whatever they are in between. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
What is your take on that? And because I think we're looking at a youth movement that's really educated themselves and gotten active in this whole political environment. What do you think we're going right now?
Yeah, this is a brutal time in our country, and it has me passionately concerned. There's a reason why I'm here with you tonight. There's a reason why I'm getting involved with the DNC, and there's a reason why I'm getting involved with grassroots movements. I think what we're seeing coming out of the White House today is disturbing. Mm-hmm. All right. I grew up in an environment. I think we spent 8 years in an environment. Well, let me take a step back. I'm apolitical. I'm registered independent. Mm-hmm. I vote for who I think the right candidate is. But I also feel compassion and empathy for those who are less fortunate. And I think that we're not seeing that come out of our White House right now.
Right.
And it's important that we get back to that. We are a nation of immigrants. Mm-hmm. We are a group of, I've heard stories on the news lately that have me so disturbed where people say, we don't want them in our country. Well,
right.
Well, America is a beautiful experiment.
Full of them.
We don't have a them. Right. It's only us.
Right.
Right. I saw something funny on Facebook the other day where people were talking about, my parents came here legally. Well, if you went back to the 1920s, there were no requirements to come into this country.
Exactly.
And then I heard the best one, which I absolutely loved, and I didn't even know. My sister responded to one of these comments on Facebook and said, "Hey, Grandma came here illegally."
Right.
Right. So I am the product of an illegal immigrant that came in from Canada. Right. Worked in homes in Detroit, cleaning floors, taking care of other people's kids, and doing the right thing. We were talking about Jeff Sessions the other day, and one of the things that had come up was his comments about a particular racial group and 95% of them not being able to actually add any value back to our country. And I found that inherently challenging. And I said, well, how do you determine who's going to add value and who's not?
Right.
Right. So, if you didn't let my grandmother into this country or you rounded her up and exported, well, I wouldn't be here today trying to help kids in the environment that I am. My kids would not be in private school. I wouldn't be living an affluent life, helping my clients, helping my community. I'm not sure how you make that work, but getting back to the crux of your question is, change is necessary. This tone from Washington right now is not acceptable. It's in my mind, it's not about Republican and it's not about Democrat.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
It's not about independent. It's about we as a people and where we want to be.
I totally agree with that, and that's what I wanted to hear you say. Along with everything else you said, I think that's important that we understand that it's not if I'm a Democrat, if I'm a Republican, if I'm for Donald Trump or against Donald Trump. It's not. That's not what it is. It's about the person in charge making the right decisions with his cabinets or her cabinet, whoever they may be, to say this is best for the people as a whole.
Right.
I think we've gotten away from that, and I like the fact that the younger generation, the generation behind you and I, and maybe even one step further back, they've gotten so educated and so involved, and I think they're going to push the envelope.
I hope they're going to. And one of the reasons why I got involved with this campaign, and I'm getting more involved with what I would call more political discussions, is because we have to. So I am that person that was not involved. I am that person that did not take interest.
Right. And you're not alone.
Yeah.
You're not alone.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a phenomenon in this country right now beyond the Trump phenomenon, which is very concerning, particularly talking about the alt-right and some of the white nationalism that's coming out of that, some of the racism and the xenophobia and misogyny. It's just frankly disturbing. It's not who we are as a nation, and we've got to fight that with, frankly, every ounce of our fiber. But more importantly, I'm glad you're saying the kids are getting involved, and that's why I'm here today, and that's why I want to help coach these kids and mentor them. I did not have I wouldn't. You asked me earlier, how did I get to where I got to? Couple of things. I had good people that are still in my life today that coached me and mentored me and helped me grow. And that's what we've got to do for these kids, because they're coming into a world they don't have the network, just like I didn't.
Right.
I'll tell you a funny story. My son was visiting me in D.C. and we've been talking about these things just like I'm talking to you about for years with our kids. And he didn't want to be in a hotel room, so he went downstairs to the lobby. Right. And he got into a conversation with some folks from the Cato Institute, which is a think tank in D.C. Now, I didn't do this. I didn't help him, but all of this coaching and mentoring over the years gave him the wherewithal to go and meet the chairman of the Cato Institute and be able to have discussions with this gentleman, and they've invited him back, and he's working with some of the interns. My point is, we've got to teach these kids how they can have those conversations. And I'm a proud father. Very good. It's great that my son's doing it, but I want to teach that kid that's in the inner city that doesn't know that conversation can happen. Right. Reading, and we got to talk about this, because I don't think the president of our United States right now reads. I read incessantly. No, this is funny. I only laugh, and I don't mean to cut you off. I laugh because there were a couple of times I watched him speak, and I had the impression, and being someone who's now sitting in front of a camera, I'm watching his eyes and I'm watching what he's doing, and I could see the uncomfortableness in him. And I'm thinking he's trying to read what they've told him to say, and he can't keep up. Right. Running a country is very different than running a construction company. Absolutely. Privately held construction company. We can talk about that another time. More importantly, reading. I read incessantly. My children read incessantly. We just packed up and moved. We sold our house in Ernst Young, moved into Harrison, and now we're building a new home. And I had to pack up my son's library, and I was fascinated by the books that were on his shelf. And I just picked up the phone, because he does it on his own. I said, "Have you read all of these books?" He said, "Pretty much that, every single one of them." I'm talking about hundreds of books. Gotcha. And it's so incredibly important, because that's why I find him so interesting. That's why he has conversations with adults, and they want to listen to him. Reading does so much more than tell you a story. Right? It helps your brain function, helps your eyes function, it helps you relate, it gives you important things to talk about. And as we compare that, I thought it was a joke. I did some research the other day, and I had heard that our president doesn't read, and then whether it's true or not, I don't know, but I did some research, and turns out he may not. But neither here nor there. When it comes to our young people, we need to tell them, guys, this is the method. This is the methodology that you have to, that you have to follow in order to be successful. Right. And there is a methodology. Now, I'm a firm believer in people are born to be leaders, right? You can teach people to manage. You can teach people to be effective and productive in society. But on the football field when I was a kid, in sports, you knew who the leaders were. They rose to the top constantly. Right. Now, when you find the kids that are born to be leaders, you got to cultivate them. Make sure that that's not lost. Absolutely. And somebody asked me the other day, how do you know the president's not going to be successful? I said, well, successful people can actually look at other people and very quickly point out, what are those factors that make someone successful? Right. He does not have the factors to be successful. Right. Now, what I'd like to do is take that and work with our kids and help them identify What are those factors? Yeah, I out-counsel people and hire people all the time. We recruit on the college campuses. And by the way, I want to touch on this, the millennials for a second if we can.
Sure.
These kids are no snowflakes.
Exactly.
They are
totally
fascinating. They are well-read. They are highly intelligent. They are highly motivated, and they are the future of their country.
And they know it.
Yeah. And they are not lazy. Okay. I watch these kids. I'm going back and forth with them at 3, 4 in the morning. They're up. They're working. They're mobilizing. And they're going to be the change in this country. We can help mentor it. We can help coach it. We can help guide it. They're going to make the change, because at the end of the day, Larry, it's their country. Right.
That's what
we've got to pass something on to them.
That's what it comes down to. You know, I want to go back a little bit. I love what you said about your son. I have a son as well, and he's actually 29.
Okay.
And you know, one thing was, while I was making my way, I didn't initially realize all the things I constantly told him he held on to.
Oh, sure.
And we talked about Facebook, and I'm very active on Facebook. I have opinions. And I'm very active on Facebook. Right. And what has happened over the last couple of months is he's jumped into those conversations. So
my son
he
is
understands that he understands. And I have friends calling me now. I'm 51 years old, and this kid is 29 years old. He's not a kid, but I have friends calling me and saying, "That's your son?"
Yeah. I'm always embarrassed when we look back on the kids, and I say, "Geez, I'm glad Facebook wasn't around when I was that age, because I certainly wasn't as articulate."
Yeah, I would have said something crazy. I get it.
And I too, you know, it's kind of funny. I've written some open letters lately that are circulating around the internet, and I had to think long and hard about signing my name to them. I've shared them with the producers of this program, and they're pretty critical of what's going on in this country right now, and they're also focused on what we need to do to change. And before I signed and inked my name to that letter, I had to look in the mirror and go, what's more important to me? Now, I've done well. I am the 1%. Okay? And that's fine, right? My kids have lived a good life. I've worked very, very hard to get where I'm at, but I will not let my economics dictate my moral fiber.
Understood.
And I think more people need to do that in this country. I've got great friends that I went to college with that said, well, I'm willing to overlook, you know, some of these things that this man says because he's going to give me a tax break. Well, I'm going to take every dollar of that tax break and put it into fighting this administration, because we cannot stand for this. This is not normal.
Right.
This is not normal. And you know, getting back to the kids for a minute, we've got to teach them that this is not normal. I cannot have my daughter growing up in a society that thinks that it's okay to do the things that this man has done.
Absolutely.
Period. You know, and I didn't mean to get this political, but there's right, wrong, and indifferent. Okay, you got to take a side.
Right.
And we've got to be on the right side of history here.
Right. So you know, step back one more time. I want to go to, you know, you said you penned these letters, these open letters. I think it's important that we do that. I think that it's important that we take a stand. I mean, we all have something to lose, but then there's so much more to gain. Yeah. And as I said, I'm active on Facebook, and I have opinions. And I, like you, I have coworkers and things that are friends on my page, and I had to think long and hard about so many things that I post. But the funny, I won't say it's funny, the interesting thing is when I go in the next day, they're like, that was pretty good.
Oh, Larry.
Especially when I thought, you know what, they're gonna rip me one, but this is my opinion, and,
I agree.
and I have to live with my words.
Right.
And when I walk in and they go, I like that, or they comment, and I tell them, so see, you're part of it now. You can't hide. I got you. Yeah. So it's really important that we take a stand as adults. It gives the generation behind us, whether it's our children or someone else's children, the ability and the comfortability to say, you know what, if he can do that, I can do that. Like you, I grew up in the South Bronx, Watson Avenue.
Oh, sure.
My goal was to...
In some of the toughest times in the South Bronx. The 80s, the 80s was a tough time to grow up, you know. We saw a lot of tough stuff, I
mean, you know the neighborhood.
Oh, yeah.
And I tell people, the way I grew up, like you, I didn't know there was something outside of that 5-block radius.
So scary.
That's
scary,
all
man.
I knew.
You touch on something incredibly important that we should delve into. I knew the drug dealers, right?
Yeah,
I knew the kids. Yeah, I knew the kids running in the street. I knew the kids committing the crimes. And what I found, the common bond between all of them, were a lack of knowledge beyond our universe.
Gotcha. So Don, I really appreciate this conversation, and this is one that I'm sure we'll have off air.
Absolutely.
But we're coming to the close of our show. I just want you to just give me one little message that you would like to send out to folks that have come from, that are where you're coming from.
Yeah.
That'll give them a little inspiration.
The art of the possible. I think what kids have to do today is dream big.
Dream big.
Well, dream big. But dreaming big isn't enough. What we've really got to do is say, what are our goals, right? So I like to think of strategy and then the tactical, implementable plan to achieve that strategy, right?
Gotcha.
So set a big goal and then say, how am I going to get there? And check yourself every step of the way and say, can we achieve it? But more importantly, be willing to evolve. And I'll tell you a funny story in closing. I've known my wife over 20, going on 30 years now. She's watched me evolve.
Good.
I am not the same man today I was.
None of us are, Don.
Right? You got to evolve.
None of us are. Don, I really appreciate this.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you.
Absolute pleasure to be here today.
And that concludes this segment of Ignite, Empower, Transform, where our superheroes come to the rescue.